Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for participating in the Big Brothers Big Sisters virtual conference. We're delighted you've joined us for this training session today. I'm Brittany with Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, and we're excited to present Stronger Families Equal Stronger Matches. Before we turn it over to our speakers, we have just a bit of housekeeping to go over. All lines are muted, but you can ask questions by typing your question into the question box. We will address questions throughout the presentation. We hope to answer all of your questions during our time today. If not, we will follow up with you after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and you can access the recording later in the on-demand video library on the conference website. As a reminder, the virtual conference ends on June 26th with a Bigger Together celebration. We hope you will join us. Without further ado, I will turn it over to our speakers.
Thanks so much, Brittany. And hello, everyone. It's great to finish out week one of the conference with you today. My name is Tim Pelkey, and I serve as the Program Design Manager at the National Office. And in that role, I oversee a lot of our specialty mentoring programs, including our family engagement programming. And we have an exciting presentation for you today that will focus on some of the ways that agencies can support families through their work in terms of mentoring. Now, in most cases, a child's relationship with their parent or guardian is their first and most impactful of all relationships. Many of these caregivers are facing significant financial, health, and other transportation challenges that can make establishing and maintaining close mentoring relationships a challenge, and no time more than the COVID-19 period that we're in right now. Agencies are in a unique position to partner with parents and guardians with the goal of strengthening families and increasing the likelihood of enduring matched relationships that result in positive outcomes for youth. Now, as an organization, we recognize the importance of moving from parents as recipients of programming to their engagement as full partners. And for that reason, family engagement was included as a part of the 2022 Bigger Together strategic plan. I'm pleased to present to you our co-presenters today. We have Dr. Jean Rolke-Partain, who is the Vice President for Research and Development at Search Institute, and Ellie Martinez, the Director of Programs at BBBS Services in Greater Richmond. You'll hear from them a little bit later in the presentation. To provide a brief overview of our organization of the presentation today, we'll start out with some information on family engagement work across the network. We'll then move into some actions that your agency can take from Jean. And then Ellie will provide some examples from their agency's work with the Keep Connected program. And that'll be followed by some digital resources. And throughout the presentation, I would definitely encourage you to share your questions. We'll take some time after each of the sections to answer some, as well as time at the end. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Research indicates that when mentoring relationships affirm the role of parents and guardians, the whole family can benefit. This is confirmed by a study of families in the BBBS network at Kentuckiana, which found that matches with an engaged adult caregiver have higher strength of relationship scores and are more likely to endure beyond the 12-month period. For that reason, our network is committed to helping agency staff to engage parents and guardians. How do we do that, you may be wondering? Well, over the last 2 years, we have partnered with 6 agencies on a project funded by the Altria Group, focused on really trying out some different approaches to family engagement. And they're summarized, but what we tentatively call the ACT model. And the A in that is assessment, and that is through the risk and protective inventory. And that's a tool we'll talk about in just a minute, but it's a way of really getting a sense of what families' needs are, as well as their strengths. Now, the care part of that is once we know more about families' needs, we can match them with wraparound services. Some of those services are provided directly by agencies, but many of them are actually developed through partnerships with other nonprofits, as well as governmental agencies in your local community. The T is training. That's training for families, which includes Keep Connected, a 7-part series that brings together middle school students with their parents through guided activities that really help them to strengthen their relationship. And we also have a curriculum of different resources available on the Learning Exchange, which we'll share at the later on in the presentation. But just as a precursor, if you look up family engagement in the Learning Exchange, you can actually find an abundance of different resources that are available for free to use at your agency. The Risk and Protective Inventory is a 59-item questionnaire that is administered to parents and guardians at the time of enrollment. It was originally developed through the Gates Foundation funded Risk and Mentoring study and was expanded to use across the network. And for a while, we used it just with the juvenile justice grant agencies, but it's actually available to everyone now. And that's something you can also find in the Learning Exchange or on BBBS Connect. And this really provides a great risk profile for each of the youth entering the program. And you'll get a report for each of them, as well as an understanding of their risk for juvenile justice involvement. Here's a summary of some of the results. Now, one thing to point out, these are not numbers for the entire network. These are primarily results from juvenile justice grantees, but there were over 11,000 surveys completed in 2019, so it does give about a 10% assessment of the entire network. So there's some really great data here to point out. And you can see number one in terms of protective factors, which protective factors are various aspects of someone's life that can act as a barrier to negative experiences. And they're often associated with positive mental, emotional, and or behavioral outcomes. So these are actually things that really will be considered strengths that in a matched relationship you can build upon. And one being that my child cares about other children's feelings at 94%. Another one, number two, I'm aware of where my child is if they're not at home, which is an important thing, also 94%. My child tries to do well at school. My child has good relationships with their teachers. My child voluntarily helps others, and the list goes on. You can see that all of these are over 90%. So our children definitely do have a lot of strengths entering the matched relationship, which is important as we consider the risk factors. Risk factors are different variables in someone's life that can lead to negative mental, emotional, or behavioral outcomes. One example is question 15. My child often has difficulty controlling his or her feelings. Now, national results indicate that 63% of youth in our network struggle with this area. Just to kind of walk you through how you might use some of this data in your agency, at the time of enrollment, this is something that would be a thing to really kind of red flag and have a conversation with the mentor. In matching support, you might consider referring children to a mental health counselor and other resources in your local community, depending on the severity. There are also programs available that teach coping skills to manage emotions. And for development on a bigger level, if your agency finds that looking at your totals across your agency that this is an issue that a lot of you struggle with in your program, you might do a specialty mentoring program that focuses on this area, either providing some additional enrichment activities or other resources. So that is the risk and protective inventory. Another resource that we draw data from is the 2020 Network Snapshot. And I'm sure many of you have filled this out. It's a very long survey, but it really does provide an abundance of useful data. And this is how we as a network learn about some of the programs and practices that are being provided across the network. And looking at results for the family engagement section, we can see that agencies do provide a lot of very interesting wraparound services. But the services they provide directly really don't address a lot of these larger needs. Partnerships are key. It's partnerships with organizations in your community that have free or low cost sliding scale mental health services, partnerships with organizations that might provide housing and utility assistance, clothing. We've heard from agencies about partnerships that lead to youth getting furniture, bedding and other things. So really, at the agency level, it's definitely something looking at this data to definitely have a deeper conversation about where you as an agency are in terms of both the services you provide as well as the referrals. And through this grant funded project that we've worked on, we've had some deeper conversations about that and definitely learned a lot along the way. And with that, we'll take a minute to answer any questions that have come up so far. Somebody says the handout is not working. I'm sure, Brittany, if you can speak to that. One thing just to let you know, we will share also the handout and other resources after the presentation through the Workplace by Facebook group. So if you're not a part of that, definitely would encourage you to join. Just look up Family Engagement on Workplace by Facebook. All right, with that, we'll move on to our next section. I will turn it over to Jean to talk about 7 shifts for engaging families. Take it away, Jean.
And it's easier to take it away if I unmute myself. So,
Always happens.
Always happens every time I do this thing. It's great to be with you this afternoon, and delighted to be partner with Big Brothers Big Sisters in this project. I've really enjoyed this work together. Before we get started, I just wanted to get a sense of feel for the things you're working with. I know that as I talked to a lot of different people around the country in different organizations, that sometimes engaging families is hard. And sometimes it's helpful to remind ourselves of that. I'm just curious if we can put up the poll and just see where you guys are in terms of the kind of challenges that you're facing. And this is a no shame thing because a lot of different people face this stuff. So what are the ones that maybe you are facing as someone who's working with to engage families? So just select one of the following around to be the other priorities. Transportation. We didn't put coronavirus up there. Sorry, that's the short term in the recent things, but these are some of the longer things. Hopefully it's short term. We don't know what it'll be, I guess. But so what are your thoughts on those pieces? Just give you a second to respond. The drama is growing, isn't it? Yeah, so, okay, yep. So we got to pull up there. The busyness and priorities is always a huge challenge. Lack of interest, transportation schedules, and then we don't really know each other. Okay, very interesting. So let's talk about these things and begin to think about the different challenges that families face and sort of how we begin to think about it. And part of why I do that is sometimes when we get into these things, we have some assumptions about it, and the things people tell us may not be what's behind the story. And so part of what I want to do is to have us maybe look at family engagement a little bit differently and maybe see some other things as we go along with that. And I come at this from the perspective of Search Institute, where I've been there almost 30 years, and we really spend a lot of time reframing how we think about young people. And I also want us now to think a little bit about how we reframe how we think about families. And Search Institute, if you don't know our work, we've been focused around positive youth development for a long time, and really about bridging research and practice to help young people be and become their best selves. I think that has a lot of synergy with your mission around bringing out the potential of young people through mentoring. So I think it's been great to be partners with you. We do a lot of theory building work about thinking about the work on developmental assets, which you may have heard of, and then thinking about kids in all the different contexts where they spend time. And our work today is really focused around understanding the kind of relationships kids have and need in their lives. And then we do that work, the research, and then we look at what are the practical tools and the ways we think about that can help people really take that strength on to work on building those strengths. And our impact comes through our partners, which is, again, why I'm thrilled to be working with you guys and to have the partnership with Big Brothers Big Sisters America. So when we think about our work, and we've been working with families, we think there are probably at least seven shifts. And don't panic, we're not going to go through all seven of them, but we've given you a handout. On the handout, if you can get that talks about all these. We're going to talk about three of them as a way to give you a glimpse into the work. And if you get interested and keep connected, we can. This is really the basis for how we've designed Keep Connected. When we think about families, it's shifting our thinking around that from deficits and risks to strengths, parenting skills to thinking about relationships, focusing on our agenda to their agenda, thinking about shifting from recruiting families to building relationship with families, thinking only early childhood is where families are engaged, to thinking about their own life, their full lives, thinking about working with individual families to connecting with communities, and then moving from just serving families to empowering families. So that's a long list, but I just put that out there to think about. Part of what we need to do, one of the challenges with families is sometimes our mindset about what it means to engage families might not be where families are and what they're dealing with. And some of the things we talked about with transportation and whether they're interested or not and all that may also be because we're not always connecting with them and coming from their vantage point. So I'm going to just move into these and we'll talk about them in our next mind break. The first one is around shifting from deficits and risks to strengths. And we could spend a long time on this. It's the same thing we've dealt with in youth development, and it really reflects your shift in your mission statement in the last couple of years. In family studies, and I'll let you read the quote, I won't bother, most of the research about families is focused on their deficits, their dysfunction, and what's wrong with families. And that's been the narrative all along. And so in the last 20 or 30 years, it's really been how do we begin to rethink about understanding the strengths of families as well. And if you think about it, going to the next slide, if you think about how we've understand families, there's been a whole narrative around the families are in crisis. The structure of families is their destiny. This is a lot of the structural issues we're talking about right now with racism. If you're born this way, this is where you're going to end up. You have risks and deficits. We, the professionals, know what you need, and so we're going to fix you. And if we can't fix the family, we're going to set up programs to work around the families. And unfortunately, that's actually been part of what some people have interpreted mentoring to be. And I don't think this is your message, but I have people said, if the family's broken, give them a mentor and to work around the family. And that's really problematic in terms of you're complementing and giving an additional resource to a family, not working around it. And so how do we begin to shift from thinking about families in crisis, families as deficits, to beginning to shift the thinking about that? So we hear these two different narratives. We hear this narrative, families are broken. And in one study by University of Virginia, they said 64% of parents have families have declined since they were kids. And then on the other hand, people say, my family is the most important thing to me, and 75% of adults say they're completely satisfied with their families. And so we have this interesting summary statement about today's families are really important, are really messed up, and nothing is more important to me than my family. And people say that in the same breath. It's kind of like, Congress is all messed up, but my member of Congress is great. So there's this real disconnect between how we think about families. And so there's this wonderful study that Vern Bankston and his colleagues did following families for 3 or 4 generations in LA, rapidly changing demographics from the 60s to the 2000s that they were following these families. And basically what they found is families are changing, no doubt about that. Families are changing, but they've changed and they've adapted for the most part. Families have changed and adapted to continue to provide the essential functions of families. So yes, they're different. They're changing. That doesn't mean they're broken. And so how do we approach families and working with families from recognizing they've changed? They may not look the same, they may not feel the same. Yes, they have challenges. All families have challenges. But how do we begin to also now recognize that they also have strengths and that we approach their strengths and understand and recognize their strengths? Okay, the second shift we'll focus on is shifting from focusing on parenting skills to family relationships. And most parenting programs are all about the skills. Let's give them some more skills. We know what's wrong with them, so let's give them some skills to do that. And there's all these books out there about new skills that you can learn and new ways to be a parent. And I put this up here because one of them I wrote. So skills are good things. We need skills. All of that's really important. But at its core, if you think about it, parenting is a relationship. And I love the quote on the next slide from Alison Gottner, who teaches at Berkeley, where she says, parent is not actually a verb, not a form of work. And it isn't and shouldn't be directed toward the goal of sculpting a child into a particular kind of adult. Instead, to be a parent, to care for a child, is to be part of a profound and unique human relationship, to engage in a particular kind of love. And so when we're talking about parenting and being a parent, we're talking about being in a relationship. And so Keep Connected in the work we're doing is to help remind people that as a parent, you're in a relationship, but what kind of relationship? You want to be in a relationship that helps kids grow. And that's really what a developmental relationship is. And that's really what Keep Connected is all about. And so we're going to talk really fast about what a developmental relationship is. It's a relationship that are the kind of relationships that are roots of kids' success. They're the roots of thriving. They're kind of relationships that's multidimensional, the kind of thing that's thinking about responding to the kids wherever they are. It's in the kind of relationship that every kid needs to nurture their growth. It's the kind of relationship that's a give and take between a parent and a child. And it's the kind of relationship that can be harmed by inequities, trauma, discrimination that contaminate the world around the family. So what does that look like? And some of you may have seen this in other places you've been. It's a developmental relationship is one where family learns, and all of us learn, to express care, to challenge growth, to provide support, to share power, to expand possibilities, all the elements of a relationship. And these are the things we talk about and Keep Connected. There's 20 actions under these things. And we help families, kids and parents together think about how do we become more intentional about this? How do we do these things together in our family? And what does that look like? And then as we go along and do that, we think about how does that then affect the family? So this is what we learn, and then we begin to see how that affects in our studies the resilience of a family. On the next slide, we can look at families who are under high stress, and if they have these kind of relationships in families, we see that they're 21 more times more likely to be able to manage their emotions. They're 13 times more likely to be able to persevere through difficulties. They're 9 times more likely to have a strong sense of purpose. And they're, got too many things on my screen, 5 times more likely to report being socially responsible. So why we're talking to families about developing these relationships in families is even when they're in the midst of stress, these kind of relationships can help them maneuver and be resilient across those times of stress. So that's really what Keep Connected is all about, and what we're talking about, how do we in our agencies support families in these times of stress? And so when we're talking about during this time of COVID-19, what we've been working on is how do we reinforce those positive relationships within families when they're under this stress, and how do we listen to where families value our support and help them with that. And so that's really been how, as we've talked with agencies that are doing Keep Connected, how are they supporting those relationships? So then the next big shift, the third one, this is the last one we'll talk through, is thinking about the idea of shifting from recruiting families to building relationships. Everybody recruits families. It's the way we do, it's the language we use, and frankly, there's nothing wrong with the way we recruit families sometimes, but I think the language may be problematic. So I'm trying to encourage people to just shift to the mindset of inviting people. So why do I do this? So let's look at the next slide and look at what the dictionary says recruitment is. The dictionary says recruitment is to enlist for military service, to furnish or replenish with a fresh supply, to attempt to enroll or enlist. synonyms to enlist, call up, conscript, draft, and muster in. And so it's really about getting people to do something you want them to do. Contrast that with invite. To make a polite, formal, or friendly request to someone to do something, go somewhere, or do something. To ask, to summon, to have someone over, request the pleasure of someone's company. I like that better. And I guess I'm wondering if we framed our way we approach families that way, what a difference that would make. And so that's, in some ways, it's just a word. I get that. In other ways, it's a mindset of how we think about working with families, inviting families to be part of what we do. So what if instead of starting with, on the next slide, things we need, we have stuff you need to know. If parents would just do this, our goal is to find out their needs and their problems so we can develop programs and teach them what they need to know. Remember that whole thing around skills? What have we started with? What are your hopes and dreams and struggles? And how do we learn from each other and tell each other our stories to build that trust and confidence and give them a voice and tap their priorities? And to me, this is really what gets at why it's hard to engage. Sometimes we assume that we have the knowledge, we have the expertise as the professionals to engage parents and tell them what they need to know. And that's really what our goal is. And what I'm proposing is our goal may be to first start with building a relationship and trust and engage with them as partners. And then we can be in a place where we can share wisdom with each other. We can learn about them, their family, their cultures, and they're young people, and they can maybe learn some things from us, or they can learn them from each other. So it gets at some of the things of why it's hard to engage families. So if you look at the next slide, all the things that are there that you talked about are there. The time, the schedule, the priorities, but there's also things about the attitudes and the expectations. Many families deal with embarrassment, a sense of failure, sometimes a sense of competition. They're feeling judged, labeled, diagnosed. If there's something going wrong with their kids, they feel that it's their fault, or they're often blamed for that being their fault. They're afraid of a loss of privacy, a fear of consequences. They're afraid somebody's going to check their green card. They don't know who else is going to be there, who might shame them. There's all of those things that come up. And so, yes, you may be a safe person. They don't know who else is going to be there, or all of that stuff. And so having them show up may feel safe to you. You may not understand why they won't show up, but there's all of these kind of things that happen. There may be a lack of trust in the sponsoring institution, or frankly, any institution. They may worry that participation is punitive or mandated. Every time they've been to a parenting program, it may be because it was court mandated, or because it was punitive because that was what you had to do if you were in trouble with the law. So again, I'm not saying that's what your programs are or what your invitations are, but that's what's in their minds perhaps about why they're not showing up. And so, yeah, they may say they have other priorities or all of those things, but that's part of the challenge we have to do. And so when they show up, the questions, and this is stuff that's come out of research, they want to be sure that they'll fit in, that there'll be other people like them. And maybe they've been a lot of times that there's nobody like them, that they won't look stupid. Maybe they're not literate and can't read. That they'll have something to contribute, that they won't look dumb, and that it's actually something to do. And then they won't feel pressured to do something else. How many times have you been to something and you thought that you're just going to listen, and suddenly you're asked to volunteer, or pressured to volunteer, or pressured to give money, or whatever. And so if they don't know those things, if they don't know anyone there, those are huge thresholds for participation. And so we often say, and then if it's just a flyer and no one's there who they know, showing up for a flyer is like, there's no incentive. And so nothing's more important than a personal invitation for someone who shares their life experience, who connects with them, who knows them, is trusted, warm, and knows their goals and worries, and then who will be there to welcome them, better yet, who will come with them. So it's all about that trust, building the relationship. And my hunch is that even though not having a relationship is maybe not the problem, that personal invitation and showing up with them, or having someone they know show up with them, may be what it takes to get them there, at least the first time. And getting there the first time is the hardest time in all of our experience. And I guess Ellie would probably tell you the same thing, or I hope she would, as we're having the conversation. So to me, that shift of mindset from recruiting to invitation is really the heart and soul of what we're talking about. So I think you're ready for a brain break. I know I am. So we'll stop there and see if there's any time for questions or if I've already talked too long.
Jean, we do have one question that comes in. So Chris says that he feels like a lot of their families come to them because their child is too close with the dependent or the caregiver. What type of family engagement do you recommend for those families that have good, strong relationships?
I think part of why we do this during the middle school age is oftentimes that's the time when the relationships shift. I don't think you can be too close except if there's a case of real enmeshment. I think that during early adolescence, oftentimes it shifts and that scares parents to death because they haven't really seen their child move away. So I think what we also suggest doing it in communities so that families can connect with others and kids can connect with others, because sometimes a child may be isolated from others and not have other friendships. And so that's a different issue from being close to the parent. It's about not having other connections. So forming groups where their bonds connect with other peers and also connecting with other families can also be a way that you open up and the family becomes more connected in community, not isolated. Because isolation may be the issue, not too tight of a bond with the family. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for that perspective. We don't have any more questions on deck, so if you guys have questions in the audience, please submit them now. We're going to move on to Ellie and then have the remaining questions at the end. Okay, hi everyone. I'm really excited to be here. As I mentioned earlier, I'm the Director of Programs for the agency in Richmond, Virginia. I'm really thrilled to be talking about this. It is a project that is very near and dear to my heart as we have been part of this pilot program for 2 years now. So we'll go ahead and get started. We'll tell you a little bit about our experience with Keep Connected in our agency. So, you know, I know you've heard a little bit about Keep Connected and what it looked like. I'm excited to tell you about, just from a logistics standpoint, what it looked like for us. So we've carried out Keep Connected twice now. So we've done 2 rounds of the program. The pictures you see here are from the very end of our first cohort of Keep Connected. So really going into this project, our priority was really, we needed, you know, kind of leaning into the shift that Jean was talking about, inviting our families, making it fun, and making really exciting. So we really were targeting kind of that middle age group, as you know, was already mentioned. We met every week on a Saturday, late morning. It was 7 weeks in a row. So believe it or not, we had folks, you know, staff and families come into, we met at the office, come into the office every week for 7 weeks. We started with lunch. We made it really kind of just laid back and exciting. So we had, you know, music playing when folks came in, and we had cards on the table for folks to play, and Uno and Go Fish and things like that. We pulled our families to see what kind of lunch they wanted to have. There was a lot of that intentionality behind making the environment a really comfortable space. One of the things that happened was that as the sessions progressed, we started having families arrive early just to sit with each other and with staff and hang out. And so our sessions definitely got to be a little bit longer towards the end, but really in the best way possible. So starting the project, we thought about, you know, what are some potential barriers that some families might come across? And so we really identified transportation and childcare for younger siblings. So we had kind of a variety of solutions. You know, we actually had some staff go and pick up families and drop off. We had some families that started carpooling, so we reimbursed for mileage. We also did a couple of, you know, Uber and Lyft gift cards. We would really try to meet families where they were and what made sense for them. And we also provided childcare every session. So the whole family was invited, even if just the, you know, guardian and the middle-aged child were participating. So the way the program really worked was that we split up. So guardians went into one space for their session. The youth went into another space for their session. They were really complementary sessions. They were really all around those, you know, the 5 keys that Jean touched on earlier. And that after everybody was done with their individual session, we came together for a family session, which was really discussion-based and just really powerful. So, you know, I have to be really honest, one of the things that we were really worried about starting this project, my colleague and I that carried out the session for the first time, she's in that bottom left picture all the way to the right. So I have to give her credit. Her name's Katie, and she's phenomenal. And so we were really worried that we were going to be, standing here in a room full of families talking about relationships with their middle schoolers, and we didn't have middle schooler ourselves. Neither one of us had kids, and let alone teenagers. And so there was this, we really had to come into it with just a sense of humility, in the sense of, we're here to have conversations and hear you and talk about these things. So we want to hear about what it might look like in your family. And that was kind of it. It just made sense. Families really started building rapport. They started connecting incredibly well. Like I said, they started showing up early. They started staying late and just spent time together. They stayed connected after graduation. They, exchanged phone numbers. A couple of them we've heard have gotten together again. And so that really should be a testament to what this work can look like and what it can be. You can see here a quote from one of the moms that attended the first cohort. Regardless if you have one child, if you have 3 children, if you have a girl, a boy, regardless of their age, I think there's something that every parent can take away from the program. So to hear of, a mom come into this and have this kind of feedback is incredible, and really kind of set out to cover what we were hoping this was going to achieve. So we'll move on to the next slide. And one of the things that, was really kind of nice is the entire Keep Connected curriculum is, put together, and there's a survey that is administered at the end. So there's some data collection, and it happens at the very end of, the session. So at graduation, this happened. You can see here some of the results of Search Institute was phenomenal in putting together some really cool charts and graphs and making it really nice to read. And so these are some of our biggest takeaways, and you can see that they're really powerful takeaways. So really going through this process and seeing these results, our agency had to just take a step back and really think through, what are we as an agency doing in terms of our family engagement? How does that need to shift? What else can we do? Because in reality, we carried out Keep Connected with 6 to 8 families each year, but we're serving hundreds of families. So how do we embed this work into every match, every conversation, every relationship? And so, of course, all of our families are already engaged through, the service delivery model and enrollment and match support. We did start doing the RPI survey that Tim mentioned earlier with all of our community-based families. This was really kind of a turning point. It really educated our enrollment process. It helped us significantly with the creation of our YODPs each, at the beginning and subsequently every year. The family had a really active voice in kind of what they felt the goals should be. It also helped us figure out, how are we best coaching this match, and how are we best empowering this match so that the youth can have the best possible outcomes. And to another point that was brought up earlier, what are the community resources we're engaging with? So it gave us a really clear platform for families to tell us what they felt their needs were, what supports they were looking for, and it allowed us to pretty clearly make those connections. So we really worked on our wraparound care, and so we, sought partnerships with organizations in the community that were going to meet those needs. We were able to very quickly and effectively make referrals as needed, and we have ongoing relationships with a lot of those partners. And really, to be quite frank, a lot of the information that we've gotten through the RPI and through these kind of methods that we learn more about what families are needing, it's really also helped to drive some funding, which I know is a really big part of our entire work. And so that was really meaningful. One of the things that we were able to do, because we have this really solid relationship with our families, is that as a response of COVID-19, we implemented a survey that families could opt to take. And it was just for us to get a sense of how the pandemic impacted them and what were supports that they were already engaged with, what were they needing, and so on and so forth. And so we've noticed that we certainly have more feedback, more engagement, more voice from our families, and that is exactly what we set out to do. So we started as a response to do, we've done things like offer more trainings to families. We are in the process of doing a couple of different focus groups to really help guide our work. And that all really started with, to Jane's point, kind of the shift. It really was about, how does our staff shift
our thinking, how are we shifting our work as a response to this? So I hope that's kind of some good takeaway points there. And I'll close with just a couple different quotes from some folks that were in our program. So this is from one of our littles. He was in the first round of the of Keep Connected. We were actually invited to speak on a radio segment here in Richmond. And so I know there have been some issues with the handout. I'm sure we're going to get it squared away, but there is a link in that handout to the segment. So if you want to see a picture of, little brother Anthony and his mom, please follow that link. I think it's a pretty cool segment, so I encourage you to listen to it as well. And so I did pull this right from there. The question was around, what was your takeaway from all of this and his experience? And he said, in some cases, sometimes kids should also have a voice in what's going on sometimes. We're also growing up, so we should have decisions and stuff like that. So to hear, a preteen, early middle school, realizing that he does have a voice and he does have a space to make that heard. And for him to share that with his mom is incredible. That's not always a level of conversation we're hearing from folks who have, middle school kids. So that was very cool. And we'll move on to our last quote, which is from a mom. And, she said, all these tools and tips from the program have added to the type of parent I want to be. It's helping me become the parent I've always wanted to be. So again, thinking about that shift, our families have strengths, they are well-resourced. We're just adding to that, and we are just helping her to do the things she's always wanted to do. So I think it's a truly powerful program, but even aside from Keep Connected in general, being able to infuse this into all of our work is really fantastic. So I hope that answers some of your questions on what this looks like for us. And we'll kind of move on to our next brain break.
We do have several questions on deck for you, Ellie. So can you talk a little bit about how many participants were in the program and how you funded this? People are asking about more about the grant that you received.
Sure, absolutely. So we, I know in the very, very beginning, Tim had a little bit of a segment about we were fortunate to be part of an Altria-funded project that we are in our second year. So yes, there was a grant attached to it. I will also say there are organizations local to us that prioritize family engagement, and so we've been able to appeal to them and say this is the work we're doing. So I think really figuring out who else in your community sees this as an important facet of your work is important, because you can pretty easily appeal to them to help fund some of this work. And in terms of how many folks we had, I believe we had the very first cohort, we started with 8 families, I believe, and we had one that had we had a couple that weren't able to finish, but I believe we finished with, gosh, I can't remember. This was early last year. Maybe we finished with 8 the first time. I think we finished with 6 families that completed all the sessions the second year. So, about 12 to 14 families have gone through our Keep Connected program over the course of our 2 years in the pilot project.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit more about the curriculum for the program?
Sure. And Jean, I'm gonna, if I miss anything, I want you to chime in here. So please feel free. It's fantastic. It really is. So it follows the 5 keys to developmental relationships that were brought up earlier. And so each week is kind of modeled after that as a framework. And so it walks through, kind of what are the discussion questions for the families, for the youth, what is the activity, what are the things that are going to get our group talking. And then for the kids, there are more hands-on activities. So, there are times where they're using blocks, or they're using, kind of little blindfolds for a little course. It's a little bit more, it's certainly very age appropriate. It's a little bit different, but it walks you right through everything. And then the family session tends to be group discussion based, which is, we probably had some really interesting conversations in those sessions where kids would say things and parents like, whoa, where did that come from? But it led to really great conversations, because kids were coming from this place of, I'm finding my voice, I'm exciting things that are important to me to talk about, so let's bring it up. But a lot of those kind of family sessions are geared towards group discussion and group work. So back to the point that was made earlier, it's that relationship with other kids, with other families that was really important in this. And that's really what the curriculum is around. I hope that answered it. But if it didn't, please keep asking questions.
Yeah, I think that was great. Can you share some of your tips for engaging families in this way, or engaging families in general for extra, trainings or services that other agencies might be offering?
Sure. So, I mean, I think that's a two-parter. I think if you're going, really in the Keep Connected way, it all boils down to that inviting family approach. And so I think everything you do really stems off of that. I know that for us as an agency, we were very much in a place of, gosh, we have to have, 10 families in this locality participating in this program. So when you really change that thinking to there's this opportunity that we're going to invite families to, that 100% change our conversation. I know that sounds quite simple, but it really is kind of a shift in staff's kind of way of thinking. I think really making sure folks know that you're there to listen to them, and making sure you're asking the right questions. So telling people that you want to hear their opinion and their input is valuable and it's powerful, and it's not a question that we had asked a lot of our families before. When you're thinking, for our team, as you're going through match support, you kind of have a routine, you have the areas you need to ask about. So breaking out of that a little bit is important. Just making sure you're coming up with some important ways to say, we're really looking at our work and how this works for you. Where are we going? What are the things that we're doing that are working? What are the things that are not working for you? And hearing people and following up with people is critical too. So making sure folks know their input is not only being heard, but being used in a productive way is going to make all the difference. And it's gradual. Like Jean said, it's trust building. So it's gradual for sure.
Thanks. I think we'll hold all remaining questions till the end.
Great. I'm back. I just had a couple of really quick things to what Ellie said. One of the great opportunities we had at Search in working with this pilot was we got tons of feedback from your colleagues about the curriculum, about every session, and we're just finishing up integrating all their feedback, including some strengthening the activities for young people, and dealing with some areas that people didn't think were quite as culturally responsive as they needed to be. So we really take that feedback seriously. So the next time people get engaged with Keep Connected, it will reflect all of that feedback, and we're continuously trying to learn and improve. So those are all things we take seriously and work on. The other thing is, I'll stop there with that, and really appreciate that kind of feedback. And none of the sessions have lectures in them, so it's all guide people into thinking through and discovering the wisdom in the group, and then also the material guides with some handouts and stuff to different things. So hopefully that's part of what your experience would be as you got into that. So we do have a number of e-learning resources and stuff online, as well as the place-based material. All of our material is on a website that we have called keepconnected.info. And I think a lot of it is also on your website for the family engagement resources. We have stuff for families there, and we have stuff for facilitators at keepconnected.info. And once you've been trained as a Keep Connected facilitator, there's a whole toolkit there that you have access to as well to do the 7-week sessions. And we have all of the handouts for parents, parenting adults in Spanish as well on that website, and other resources there. We are actively working to put together a online Keep Connected Institute for people who want to be trained to be facilitators. That's going to greatly reduce the cost of actually getting started with Keep Connected. It's been a barrier that people have to fly somewhere, have 2 people fly somewhere to do this. So we haven't figured out all the details on that, but that is coming. And we'll make that easy, and I think it's actually going to be a really good experience for folks. So stay tuned for that, and Tim will be all over it when we get that done. We created this this spring with Tim's encouragement, some what we call digital check-ins to keep connected, which is the next slide. And this is basically something you can use right now. It's on there, it's free. It basically introduces developmental relationships, which you have a small group of parents. They are introduced to the developmental relationships in a really informal 30-minute check-in by Zoom or conference call. And then it has simple activities they can do together at home in the coming week or couple of weeks, however you want to structure it. And they do that on their own, and the parents come back together and have a conversation. So if you have parents you're already engaged with or you want to connect with and you have a way to do that, this is a simple way to do it during the summer if they're all still home and you can't connect. So that's there for you. Again, it's really designed for parents with middle schoolers, but there's some flexibility in there and families can figure that out. And that's what the pages look like in terms of what's there. We have some more we're adding still that on other topics. There's one on alcohol and tobacco, on using money, and on making family decisions. The next slide is about some book discussion starters. And so again, if you have access to some of the books that are there, we have just children's books for younger children, and then discussion starters that are in English and Spanish, or the books sort of pick up themes on strong families. And so another way for them to just engage together with that. And then we've been working with several, and the last set of things we'll do here, several of our national partners, including Big Brothers Big Sisters, to work on developing some online learning sessions. So each will be about 30 minutes around different ways to strengthen your practice as a family serving professional or practitioner. And they'll be in these 5 areas around foundations of working with families. It includes all like the 7 shifts, building those relationships with families, leading programs, supporting families through those challenges and changes, and then really developing the leadership and the helping families be engaged in service and things like that. And so we got a lot of ideas. We're working on that and on different ways to deliver that. And we hope those will be available as a really good resource for you that will be available to Big Brothers Big Sisters through us or through your networks as soon as we can get them done, basically. And Tim will be one getting out to everybody. But we thought, since we're working on that, since we've got you here for a minute, we thought we'd do just a quick poll of some of the topics we're thinking about doing and see which ones you're most interested in. So we've got some ideas there around which of these would you want to go to first? So we know where to start, maybe. Using technology to connect with families, how to get started with Keep Connected, how to build on families' strength even when they face some challenges, building a foundation of trust with parenting adults, and common but hidden barriers to parenting today with partnering with today's families. So which of those would you want to go to first? Just forcing a forced choice. And then we'll have those starting this summer or fall. We'll be able to start rolling those out. Great. Looks like people want a whole bunch of things. We better get busy, but this is great. Building that trust, building family strength even when they face those challenges, some of the common barriers, and wide range of interests, but the trust is really important, so it's good to see that there. So thank you for that quick feedback there, and we're glad to love for some of you to take advantage of some of those resources. And so, Tim, I think I'll turn it back to you, see what questions we have, and continue the conversation.
All right. Thank you so much, Gene and Ellie. Such great information. And I definitely encourage you to take advantage of some of the resources such as the digital check-ins. If this presentation has piqued your interest in trying and keep connected at your agency, that's a great way, because obviously, I mean, a lot of families are at home right now with more free time and maybe in close quarters with each other than they anticipated. So this is definitely a way to try out, keep connected with kind of a forced audience and see if it might be something to work for your agency. All right, I know we've had a number of questions come in.
We do have a question for Ellie. So can you talk a little bit about the staff time it took to put on this project? And if you were able to maybe train some match support specialists on how to offer, wraparound services to families as needed?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really great question. That was definitely something that was a consideration when we were starting this project and thinking, staff have to prepare for the sessions and execute the sessions and so on and so forth. So that was something that we had to think through and we had to be nimble with, and it worked, and it was very worthwhile. I will say that it can really be, you can really implement family engagement pretty easily. So one of the, I saw another question come in about, who are the points of contact for your wraparound care organizations. And so the way our agency is structured as the director of programs, I have the capability to network with those organizations, and I maintain those relationships, and I just make sure staff are aware that those are there. So as staff, those conversations should naturally be coming up in match support anyway. So when you're just asking about how things are going, you're going to hear about what resources families are looking for. And so that should fit pretty quickly within regular match support. It's one different question. The follow-up, again, is really important in making sure that that was the resource they needed and that worked out for them. But primarily, I'm able to maintain those relationships. So I'm the one, attending fairs and connecting with different folks. And that hasn't always been that way, but just it's kind of what works for our team and the way our caseloads are structured. I would say carrying out Keep Connected was definitely time consuming. That was a month where we had to shift, number of matches made and interviews and all of that, but it worked. And we just adapted, and it was fantastic. And it honestly makes the initial investment of time into those relationships in the beginning is what it might feel like, really makes up for easier match support down the road. So it offsets at some point. I hope that answers it.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you guys have a school to work program, but we have a question on how to engage school to work families.
Yeah, we do not have school to work. We have a site-based program, which is quite similar and kind of the closest thing. We have been more intentional with sending out more communication to our site-based families. I will say the way our site-based program works is we have primarily bilingual families in that program, and so that does bring up some challenges for us in reaching them as well. But the written communication has been helpful, and really also working through the schools in our case. If the school is a source of kind of where the kids are coming in from for our site-based program, connecting through the school is also helpful, and just inviting them to conversations, making sure that they know we are there, and making our resources available to them as well.
Thank you, and we'll give everyone one last chance to chat in your question. We have about 2 minutes left.
I know we got a question in about who in the agency is responsible for networking with other agencies. And we know from the Network Snapshot survey, actually, it varies a lot. Some agencies will handle that at the match support level, where individual match support specialists have, there may be an agency list over time that's been put together, or they may have, individual contacts. But some agencies are actually taking this a little bit further. I know Central Arizona, Colorado, and Chicago actually have dedicated family engagement specialists that a lot of their role is to really compile and build those relationships with community service providers.
Ellie, did your trainings take place in your office? Did you ever think about doing it somewhere else?
Yes, we did. And the space just didn't work where we were kind of thinking. We wanted to be located close enough to where most of our families were, and our office is pretty centrally located to the communities we work with. So it ended up being in our office, and I gotta tell you, we don't have a very large office, so we had to get creative. But they happened right there. We split up between a couple conference rooms, and it worked.
All right, well, we are right at 5. Thank you everyone for joining us for this session. We hope to see you next week at the Bigger Together celebration. You can check out the details on the conference website. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, everybody.